tell you what.
All right, we have a joint meeting, so I'm going to open up the city council's portion, and Commissioner Unkin is going to open up the P&Z's portion. So good evening, everyone. Time is 6:37 p.m. It is Tuesday, September 29th, and I'm going to call this special city council meeting to order. Would the city secretary please call the roll?
Mitchell.
Here.
Tobias.
Present.
Heiser.
Here.
Flores Kale. Zuniga.
Present.
Bradshaw. Parsley.
Here.
All right, 5 members present. We have a quorum. Commissioner.
Thank you. Good evening. Today is still Tuesday, August 29th, and the time is 6:37 p.m. And I'd like to call the special called meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. May I have a roll call, please?
Onken,
Here.
Delory,
Here.
Mata,
Here.
Stiegel,
Here.
James,
Here.
Chase.
Fabulous. We have a quorum. Thank you.
All right, next up is citizen comments period. Is there anyone who wishes to come forward and speak? Seeing none, close citizen comments period. Next up is considering possible action, discussion between Planning and Zoning Commission, City Council regarding draft 2030 comp plan submitted by Verdunity. Mr. Atkinson.
One moment, please. All right, Will Atkinson, the record, Director of Planning. So for tonight, this is a joint workshop between the City Council and the Planning and Zoning Commission to solicit feedback from y'all, provide comments from y'all that we are going to take note of. Just a little bit of housekeeping items here. Kayla Sharp, our city planner, is going to be keeping notes for the comments that y'all make. This will also be recorded, and so we can go back and just further refine those, and we will be happy to plug those into the spreadsheet. If you have any other comments related to this draft plan, please have them to us or include them on the spreadsheet that's on the document by no later than September the 1st. After that point, all the comments that we have collected are going to go over to Verdunity, and this is the time to provide those, because the next time you're going to see this back in front of y'all, it'll be the follow-up document and being considered for approval. So I just want to make sure that y'all are aware of that. All right, so tonight we have a comprehensive plan presentation. And some goals for tonight. Starting out, we're going to have a brief update on our downtown master plan, where staff is on that. Working through the draft comp plan chapter by chapter to ask questions and provide comments, and then provide direction on adoption for the timeline for the comprehensive plan. All right, so just a brief history on the downtown master plan. So in November of 2022 and December of 2022, the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council both voted to disapprove the downtown master plan and made recommendations for those edits. And as an extension of that, in February of 2023, the city, essentially staff and the planning department, we had an open house to collect additional feedback on the draft plan. It was very well attended. And based on that feedback from P&Z Council and the open house and the council visioning workshop, we are currently making edits to the plan. We intend to bring it back at a P&Z workshop in late September and adopt it concurrently or even possibly before the comprehensive plan on October 24th. Although it looks like it's probably going to be around the same time. I'm sorry?
Well, do you want to stop sharing?
Oh, yeah.
And join Rings Control?
It,
Doing a weird thing.
it's,
We need to stop sharing and then start sharing again.
okay, give me 1 second. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. That is kind of weird.
We're working on it, Will, so just keep going with the
Okay,
presentation,
cool.
and then we'll try to adjust it as we go forward.
Yeah, I'm not sure why it's doing it. Okay. So chapter 1 for the comprehensive plan is the introduction. This covers the basics, why we need the comprehensive plan, who's involved in the process, how the process works, how to use the plan, providing context based on existing conditions, demographics, etc. Essentially the foundation of the plan, and it sets the city up for a successful implementation. So there are 4 basic principles to this. And the primary decision-making principles that we're going to utilize. The first one being fiscally responsible. The second one being innovative and showing new ideas. The third one being having economic prosperity. And the fourth one being neighborhoods for everybody. Whenever we had our public outreach and what have you, the residents were encouraged to give all this input that we had for these principles and how they should be applied. All right, so that's chapter 1. Hopefully you all have had a chance to look over the chapter 1 of the comprehensive plan. And do y'all have any questions or any comments that you want to add to it, or any clarifications needed, or anything really? Then the floor is open. Okay, I'm going to move on to chapter 2. All right, we have the land use fiscal analysis. It establishes a baseline analysis for the city to work from. Part of this analysis was incorporating the city's current budget, identifying fiscally sustainable growth scenarios, and much more. This is my favorite part of the comp plan, by the way, as it's drafted, because it's really the reason why we chose Verdunity to come here and or recommended them, and y'all chose them for the contract, because we want to make sure that the city not only provides sustainable services to the citizens, but we also want to make a place for everyone to live in various forms, and just make this just a fantastic community. So examples of fiscally sustainable infill, you're looking at greenfield developments, you're looking at modifying blocks. This is an example of an infill block that's actually just a couple blocks north of here, actually. So it gives a little bit of different examples. You got in the green, you got the existing houses in the dark brown. And excellent. I think that looks a lot better now, actually. So this is awesome. I'm going to stop sharing here real quick. That's awesome. Thank you, Grant. In the let's see here. In the bright blue, we got an example of a duplex. Brown is a cottage, stacked duplexes in the purple, and ADUs or accessory dwelling units in the red. This is an example of multiple different types of dwelling situations where people can live. But the important thing to know is that they can all be incorporated on a single block if necessary, or if it's up to the landowner if they want to do that, and provide architectural context and scale to the site, which is extremely important depending on where you are in the city. We want everything to feel appropriate. Over on the right-hand side, we're looking at it's an example of a greenfield site next to a Hometown Kyle there. This is an example that they just put together for the purposes of the comprehensive plan. I just want to make sure that y'all understand this is not an actual project that's come to us, just as a heads up. But in both case scenarios, the goal is to provide a net positive benefit to the city from a cash flow perspective. And so the one on the left, you have about $800 yearly net revenue. The one on the right, you have an additional $123,000 coming into the general fund. Let's see here. Can you go to the next slide, please? It's not. There we go. Any questions for chapter 2? Any comments? Any feedback?
Yeah, Will, I got a question about, on page 49, there's a study called Deferred Maintenance and Street Replacement Costs. And it's got, and it paints a really dire picture. It says we're spending $3.7 million on maintenance, and we need to be spending, or will be needing to be spending $17.9 million, which which is 14.2 million shortfall. But the numbers are based here on a replacement cost of 750,000 per 11-foot lane mile, and, you know, based on average 20 years, which sounds like a 20-year life cycle for streets. Is that based on like national averages, or is this figures extracted from Kyle itself, or do you know?
It's a little bit of both. So most of our streets here in Kyle are asphalt. In fact, I'm not sure if we even have a concrete street anywhere inside the city. And a typical lifespan of that is about 20 years. And then Virginity did work with our engineering and public works staff to make sure that these numbers made sense when they did their calculations. So that is a fairly accurate number.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, sir.
Is there any land in the city of Kyle that Virginity has deemed not buildable or should be just left as green space?
In the upcoming chapter, there's portions of it. There's areas where we should focus our growth, and areas where we should, as you get further out from the periphery, to further restrict our growth. Now, something to keep in mind, and also, by the way, like floodplain areas we can identify as parks and whatever, as well. Excuse me. Something else to keep in mind: there are even throughout the city or in our ETJ, there are projects that have development agreements. For example, out near the Blanco River, where we do have to keep that in mind. We have the overall comprehensive plan, but sometimes it doesn't catch every single piece of the property. So we always have to be a little bit fluid where we are required to be or we're allowed to be a little bit too. Does that make
Thank you.
sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Question on the level 3 analysis on page 53. I know that they were doing this calculation with the best data available at the time, but looking at the map, it's quite clear that some of these areas were under construction at the time those estimates were made, and they will not, of course, be under construction for the 20-year period that we're looking at. Is there any chance that we could maybe estimate what the numbers would be in some of those under construction developments so that we get a more accurate level 3 analysis? Like, for example, Plum Creek North looks like pretty red on the level 3 analysis, but that'll be productive to some capacity soon.
What I anticipate, I'll say this, first off, is compared to the existing portion of the Plum Creek North that you see right there, it's probably going to come in. Hold on one second. I suspect that first section that is showing there is actually, it's probably lots that are platted but have not been built yet or had COs. Because by and large, the city of Kyle, the way it's developed over the last 30 years, is we've had a significant amount of single-family residential that it would be, a lot of people consider higher density. They are smaller lots, and so that does provide generally a net benefit back to the city versus services provided. And the lots up there in Plum Creek North would probably be green if we did it right now in that first phase, I would anticipate. I don't have that in front of me. I don't have one of the things that we need to work on is to figure out a spreadsheet on figuring out fiscal sustainability on a per project basis. And we're going to be reaching out to a couple cities that have done this ahead of us to make sure that happens. So we can, at that point, once we figure out what's specific to the city for the data that we need to input, then we can take in new sections of subdivisions and see if they are being fiscally sustainable as well.
Okay, so we're not planning to update level 3 analysis. We're going to leave it as is.
For the purpose of this draft comp plan, because it is, while we want to be as fluid with the document as possible and update it accordingly, in this specific map, this is providing an example of a snapshot of the picture of Kyle and its development forms at that time, which was a few months back.
Okay.
Hey, Will, I've got one. So it goes to I'm sorry, I'm a couple behind, page 59. It's the slide that you're showing that compares some of Hometown Kyle off of Center Street and Stagecoach to that undeveloped piece of land on Old Stagecoach where I guess I think that's Hometown Kyle, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so what you see on the left is a lot of single family, and it shows that there's a net loss to the city based on the dwelling units per acre. What I see in that section of Hometown Kyle, it's not a lot of parks, but on the right-hand side, where you've got some single family with ADUs, live-work units, quadplexes and things, I count 6 parks in that particular concept. So my understanding of Verdunity and what they're after, as well as just the general Strong Towns fiscally responsible model, is that you trade density for green space. And so what you're saying is, like, if you've got an acre and you could build low density, which might be something along the lines of 5 or 6 units on an acre with no park space, basically instead of parks, everyone's getting yards. The trade is to say, all right, we're going to allow 8 or 10 units per acre, or even potentially more, but we're not going to let you build over the entire thing. We're going to require you to go vertical so that we can have common area green space that everyone can use, which is what, to me, the vision on the right-hand side signifies. So my question is, do we have something in our code that takes density in exchange for green space into account, which kind of goes to maybe what Councilman Flores-Kell was trying to get at, which is this idea of, it's great to say density is profitable, but if you're building densely across every single square inch of your town, you're creating, not necessarily a very aesthetically pleasing, and you're also diminishing your quality of life. So is there a consideration that Verdunity is made for something potentially in our code, whereas if we give out, I know there's parkland dedication that's required when we give residential zoning, but is it based on the type of zoning, the type of density that we give? And if not, is that something that you're trying to build into this model so that we get the green space if we're giving the density?
So as it relates to density currently in our code, the answer is no. However, in our subdivision code and our zoning code, we use what we call the residential style guide, which requires not only does a subdivision, single family or duplex subdivision, or any residential actually have to pay $1,500 per dwelling unit to the Parks Department. On the flip side, they can also dedicate land or make park improvements in lieu of that $1,500 if there's an area identified on the Parks Master Plan.
Yeah, but they don't.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. We have the residential style guide, which in addition to that says you have to have a parklet, at least a quarter acre in size, within a 4 to 5 minute walk of almost every residence in that neighborhood as well.
Right. So, but my point is the residential style guide, which requires the pocket parks within a certain amount of walking distance, which we put in there, which has been successful, it doesn't take into account density.
Correct. We don't have density bonuses.
But
that
everything
occur in our
about
code.
this comp plan is saying that density is the way to lower the entrance, cost, per square foot for dwellings to allow for more affordable housing, and also to be more profitable or sustainable long-term from the standpoint of maintenance and ongoing obligations for the city. But the factor that I'm not hearing is the green space within a development for parkland. The more dense that you build, the more land within your private development that would be required to be dedicated to parkland.
We don't have that currently in our code, but that is something we can consider if we do.
Are there other cities that have such a code?
I don't know. So, but we can put that as a note for when we do our code rewrite. We have a significant sum of money in the proposed budget coming up for the next fiscal year. So we are open for ideas at the same time. If there's a way that we can adjust our code or rewrite our code that helps follow up on the foundation of the comp plan.
So to follow up with that, what you're saying is that we don't have anything in place right now to where if somebody wants to come in and make a development, that there's nothing that restricts them, that they have to have those pocket parks within the subdivision, if they could just, what we're trying to do is we're trying to eliminate them from just building straight out houses. We want them to be able to have certain areas where we can dedicate it as parkland, right, or open space.
Yeah,
But we don't have
I'm just
anything in
thinking
our
the-
code that says that they have to do that.
It's like if the more dwelling units per acre that you require a developer to construct, the higher percentage of the total acreage that must be dedicated to parkland. So it's like both ways. The only answer there is vertical, right? So like if you have an acre and we're saying, all right, we want you, and typically maybe it's 5 units, which is 2/10 of an acre per lot that, you know, of net buildable area that people, and they want to do it horizontally. That's not really what developers are asking for right now. They're wanting townhomes, they're wanting, you know, duplexes, condos, multifamily. And we say, all right, well, as opposed to the base zoning, which is the low-density zoning that lets you build over everything, minus all the other, you know, floodplain issues that you have to deal with, yes, we'll let you build, 20 units in an acre, but you're only going to be able to build on half the acre. So the other half of an acre has to be an open green space. So it's like the more density that you want, the more green space you have to have, which just lends itself to verticality.
Cluster development.
Well, that's the
Yes.
argument that's what I see this comp plan, that's the argument I think it's trying to make. More green space, but more density all at the same time. Lower infrastructure costs because you're only developing infrastructure to a smaller percentage of an acre's development. And yet the quality of life still goes up because the other half of the acre or whatever
So
is
are we
green
comparing
space.
it like Plum Creek versus Hometown Kyle?
Yep.
Okay. How everything's
It's Plum Creek
zoned.
versus Hometown Kyle.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question. Just to follow up with that. So we currently have something that sets the amount of green space depending on the acre billable units, correct? What we don't have, and you're mentioning, is when we are growing vertically, we're not accounting for density in people, correct? Is there anything that we could add to that? And when we are doing this, the green space, is it determined by the developer that they will have to put it, or when they pay to our Parks Department that park dedication fee, our Parks Department, is there any required number of acres per vertical unit that we currently have, or is that what we don't have?
So the way it currently works right now, Councilmember Parsley, is say someone comes in and wants to develop 100 acres somewhere in town. And they said, I want to put 500 residential units in here. So the first thing the Parks Department would calculate is $1,500 times 500. But then, as we're looking through the Parks Master Plan, maybe it shows that we're supposed to have a greenway dedicated to as a city park or a park there of some sort. So then if the Parks Master Plan shows that we need to have a park on that site or somewhere close by, and this is the opportunity to get it, then we start working with them to say, and then ultimately the Parks Board making a recommendation to y'all at City Council, they'll say, okay, we're going to be dedicating 5 acres out of the 100 for this park, and we're going to be making improvements A, B, and C to it. And the value of that parkland dedication plus the value of the improvements, we compare that to what they would have paid for in the parkland fees. Sometimes the value that they're putting into it and the dedication completely goes above that fee. Oops, excuse me. Sometimes they get a credit back to some extent too. So it's a combination of discussion with staff, taking it to the Parks Board, and then bringing it to y'all. But if there's not an area identified as a public park, and I'm in like a city-maintained park, if you will, then they generally just pay the $1,500 per unit. But that being the case, for single-family and duplex zoning, we, in addition to the parkland fee or maybe a larger park being dedicated if it's on the plan, we do require privately maintained HOA parks within the development, within a certain walk shed, if you will. You got to be able to walk in a reasonable time frame, about 4 to 5 minutes to it.
But what happens when we are building like vertically? is there any shift on, or any changes since, we are building in certain acreage, but, there are more units going up? How are we doing that? Is there any difference on the park, like the dedication fee for vertical units?
No, so a multifamily project, for example, an apartment complex, they would most likely be paying the $1,500 per unit. They wouldn't do a pocket park necessarily. They may have an amenity center with them. The only time that they would dedicate land for a public park or make improvements to a public park is if it's identified on the park's master plan.
Because you just said that they will still be paying for units, so if I have a 7-story building with 10 units per story, they will be paying $1,500 each?
Yes, if it's residential use.
Then
yeah.
it will be
But
beneficial.
we don't trade
what
density
I'm
for it.
trying to avoid is having developers just pay the fee as opposed to incorporating the green space,
Which is what I'm asking now. Are we required to have an increased amount of green space? As if we are collecting the fee, are we increasing the number of green spaces in the city of Kyle for these units? Not just taking the money, but like, how are we returning that to the city as an amenity?
So in the cases where it's not identified on the park's master plan, we collect the money. And then that money then goes into the park's budget for future improvements or future land acquisition.
But we don't have anything set saying there should be a percentage of green space for those units or for amount of money that we are collecting. I don't want to keep just like building a pot of gold, and then we don't have, if the park master plan doesn't have it, then we're just not adding green space.
Understood.
All right, I have a question. So on the right, I like the green space. But my question is going to be, if I wanted to be old school and I just wanted a house with a backyard, a good sizable backyard, where on here would I live?
In the new development on the right side?
Yes.
So there are opportunities to have a backyard on some of those units. We're not going to require everybody to have an accessory dwelling unit or a duplex and what have you. It ultimately comes down to the property owner, what they would want to build on their lot. And that's how it is already. So you can still do that there. But the general focus is making sure that there's a lot of public amenities that are within an easy walking distance from a parkland perspective. And the one that you can also, if you need to go down to the store, you can get down there. You can ride a bike, walk, and what have you. I believe the red buildings there on the hard corner, neighborhood scale commercial, a little bit of commercial out there in the blue as well, but those are more live work units.
Okay, well, my concern is I can respect the idea of having different types of units in an area, but we've completely blocked out the ability to have a traditional home. And so as much as I appreciate being able to walk, the reality is there may be people who don't want to or people who cannot. There are maybe people who don't want their kids to be playing in a public place, and although it's safer and it's more convenient, I can't say that's what is going to cater to every person that would like to live or chooses to live in the city of Kyle. So how do we integrate that into this to make sure that we don't leave anybody out? Not that we can cover everybody, but I think what we're leaving out is a majority of people who currently live within the city of Kyle.
So this comp plan is designed specifically to have a flexible amount of different types of housing units because we do want everybody to live in town. We want people to start their lives here and live there the rest of their life if they possibly can. And that means that could be from an apartment to a townhome to a single family house. Maybe they want to generate some income in retirement if they choose to do so for an ADU in their backyard. And a lot of the existing housing stock already, it can have larger backyards depending on where you are in the city. So we're not going to just come through and demolish a whole neighborhood or anything like that. Like, so.
Yeah, that's not my concern.
No, no,
My
no.
concern is not demolishing. My concern is, as we move forward, how do we incorporate that into the future of Kyle?
That can be part of the code amendments. Maybe there's an aspect of it where we say, okay, in any development, maybe there's a minimum acreage or what have you, but you need to have 3 different or 4 different housing typologies and what have you, because you're not wrong. Different people like different stuff with their different types of housing, so.
Just a quick question, Will. So if I'm looking at the integrating infill picture, so the corner lot that has the duplexes or the stacked duplexes, call that a 10-plex, whatever, that would bring a lot of vehicles to that hard corner. So then how do you balance affordable housing there, bringing it downtown Main Street, but now you've got all the extra vehicles specifically concentrated at that corner lot area, without building up parking garages, or if parking garages are part of the solution in there?
Yes, sir. So whenever we do a code rewrite, you can't ignore cars. I'm not going to say we're going to do that, because that's going to be incorrect. So every place you live, all the commercial properties, everything, they're going to have parking. What's going to be different about this is we can adjust our parking based on where it can be on site. So in this case in downtown, there's already, in the original town, almost all the blocks are or they're subdivided with alleys. A lot of times you can't really see them because they were never paved, but there's opportunities to pave those and then have parking off the back or in a garage off the back. And there's also opportunities for street parking as well as streets get rebuilt. So in the end, as long as they have the parking that they're supposed to have, and we can account for that in the code, then that's what's important. Additionally, as a block develops, it maybe goes from yield signs at a 4-way intersection like it currently does up there, and it goes to stop signs. And eventually, at key intersections, there will be lights or roundabouts, if they're not there already.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Any other questions about Chapter 2? All right. All right, so Chapter 3. This provides recommendations for land use and growth management, including a future land use plan for infill development, controlled growth areas, and areas where growth should be restricted. Let's see, for each subcategory, there's allowed typologies, and the appropriate place types are provided. As a note, it's something we've been thinking about internally. We will need further refinement of zoning recommendations and land use examples. This is a pretty good start, but as planners, we're always like, okay, so what are the externalities here? How is this going to be negatively affecting the community versus also the positive? So that's why we have that note, so you all know that we're thinking about it. All right, here we have the growth sectors map, and it's kind of hard to see for the infill and enhanced, but that's essentially around Central Kyle, around Center Street right now. So a lot of the lots would be considered a little bit larger in downtown Kyle. They have a lot of opportunity to put an ADU in the backyard or make them into a townhome or a series of townhomes along a half block and what have you. So that's where we would want to infill first. And then controlled growth to be in the yellow, which is the rest of the existing city that largely has service areas for water and wastewater and streets and what have you. We want to do our best as we possibly can within both the comprehensive plan and what state law allows us to do in the red to restrict growth. Restricted growth is areas that are at the very edge of our service areas for water and wastewater, even roads to some extent, but mostly water and wastewater. So we don't generally have the ability to serve them very well from a wet utility standpoint. So they're almost, in most cases, a lot of times they're gonna be on septic, especially those larger lots out on the Blanco River, on the west side of town. Sometimes over on the east side, we have different water providers that also have pocket wastewater plants, so sometimes they will have wastewater. But we need to be very careful that we're not extending our city services to the point to where we're going broke doing so, which is a major component of this plan. And that's why it gives us direction right here on this growth sector map, because we want to be able to adequately provide services to the city, or to the citizens. Next page, please.
Was
Oh,
was
go
that,
ahead.
sorry, well, was that middle boundary, I guess, the line, was that the 35?
Can you go back to
Was
slide
that the
11, Grant?
dividing section that goes through the center?
So I-35 does go through the center from southwest to northeast, but I guess. if
So
you
so is
wouldn't
this
mind
a
refining-
picture of 35 through the center of the controlled growth? Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Does that make more sense?
Yeah, wasn't sure what that line represented. Okay.
Yes, sir, that's I-35, and you can also see 1626 going to the north, 150 going from northwest to southeast, also BB Road on there. Go ahead.
Is the yellowed area then city limits only? And then the red outside?
Not necessarily. So we put both the city limits and the ETJ on there because it's, at some point, sometimes we do annexations, most of the time it's voluntary, based on the landowner. And so we wanted to show both of those jurisdictions on there to have a more complete picture of what's going on. So over in the far west, over by Six Creeks, it looks like a jumble of blue lines there, right next to the red and yellow. A good chunk of that is in the city, but a large chunk of that is not inside the city, but it's in our area that we could annex in the future. And that's a prime example of right there where we have a development agreement along the edge of our city where we've agreed to serve them. But we also have a floodplain map overlaid on there, so you can also see where it's further restricted, where you can actually build a development, if you will.
And I was going to just say, thank you for using some of those terms just a while ago. Southeast, northwest, things
Oh,
like
yeah.
that. Kind of,
You're welcome.
kind of looks like where we're at as far as the region of the city. So that helps. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate the legend on all of these, but sorry, I appreciate the legend on a lot of these. Can we get a breakout of like acreage and percentage as well when we see these? Because I'm having a hard time just kind of understanding how much of the city is in each of the categories, and I think that goes with pretty much anything in chapter 3 here.
So are you wanting a breakout of each color for both inside the city and in the ETJ?
How many acres?
And
Yeah,
how-
acreage
Okay.
and percentage.
And currently, like what we have right now and what's
Okay,
planned for the future.
Yep.
okay.
If I could add one more thing to the downtown, because you know how I think we ran into a situation where we had somebody wanting to develop or sell a specific lot downtown, but the zoning ran into the person's neighbor's yard, and it was kind of more of a zigzag, kind of a triangle. Because I know that some of these deeds are from back in the 1900s, or, you know, where a lot of the stuff, the development of the city was just a small little town. And we'll be working, identifying those little plots of land as well, even though maybe they had some family member or families that owned them. You kind of see where I'm getting at? Where I know that, like, especially for our downtown, that was the original heart of the city back then. But as we grew, there's probably some plots of land or little half acres or a quarter of an acre within the streets and so forth that we can identify. So that way, if there is a development that wants to come, we may end up with five family owners or something like that. Do you remember that one situation we had over there by the fire station? I think somebody wanted to upgrade or build, but then they realized that they couldn't extend the house out because their yard was at a triangle and it belonged to another family member that they couldn't, it was another family that couldn't get a hold of. Because I think our city, our town is, I think maybe you can understand what I'm getting at, that as we're starting to, especially the downtown area, there could be little plots of land or just little alleyways that may belong to the city, may not, and it's just identifying those.
I think so. Are you asking, where can we be flexible, where it's the right way to be flexible? In the
Yes.
right situations
Yes,
within
sir.
our code, our
Yes,
future
sir.
code?
Yes.
Okay.
That way, I think we will, that way, in the years to come, we don't find ourselves in a situation where we have a developer that wants to come in, or somebody wants to come in and build something there, like a building or whatever, but we end up having 3 landowners, because one of them's more of at a square, one of them's at a triangle and all that. It's identifying or updating our code, I guess, or updating our map, kind of like what they're saying, to see how many square feet or how many yards or miles we have.
So I think from what you're asking, that's more of a follow-up code rewrite where we can account for situations like that.
Okay.
Versus the comprehensive plan is just an overall larger picture kind of idea. And then we get into the details whenever, with a code rewrite, then when someone says, I want to develop lot 1 of block A, how do I do this? And then we
Yes.
can talk with them on a very specific project
Yes,
basis.
that's kind of what I'm getting at. Sorry for fumbling my words.
No, it's
Yeah.
fine. I just want to make
Yeah.
sure I'm understanding and where we go from there.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Another question, looking at this, I'm on page 77, which is the future land use map. I see in here in the downtown area, it looks to be shaded as if it is traditional neighborhood. As well, when I go to page 80, there's gross sector, an infill enhance on where the downtown area is. I'm curious kind of how this interacts with the downtown master plan, and how the thoughts from the downtown master plan will be integrated into this to make sure that they're cohesive. So your developers aren't seeing 2 different things, or even homeowners aren't seeing 2 different things when they see the downtown master plan and then they see this document.
My computer is super slow at the moment. Give me a moment. Is that a question you want me to respond to, or is that a comment for Unity to
I mean,
account for?
if you have thoughts, I'm open to hear them.
Traditional neighborhood versus, and then you got the growth sector map, you said?
I just want to make sure that that the downtown master plan that we're talking about, that we're going to present literally to council, literally at the same time, looks cohesive with this new plan. I think there's definitely I want to make sure there's consistency in those things, and also for presenting them together, if citizens see 2 different thought processes in the same area, they might get kind of confused.
Sure. So infill, when you're looking at the concentrated area of the downtown area that's in green, does not necessarily mean you're going to go 10 stories or what have you. There might be the occasional parking garage right around the square, or maybe you have a 3 or 4 story vertical mixed use building. I think in this document it would be considered what we would call a few over, where you have ground floor commercial with maybe some office on the 2nd floor and a couple of multifamily units on the 3rd floor. But it does need to be in context with what the downtown master plan is that we're going to be bringing to y'all next month, based on the citizens' input on that. Because just a brief sneak peek of that, they're wanting a more traditional look for it from an architecture standpoint. They want an appropriate late 1800s feel of a downtown, and it'll not that we want to integrate it, and it's going to integrate into it. So, does that answer your question?
I think so.
Okay.
Well, I've got a question about kind of the continuity of the maps in this section. So on page 67, where they have the limited service areas map, I see area 1 and 5. When I look at the future land use map on page 77, it looks like area 1 and 5, or at least area 1, is going to be recommended as traditional neighborhood. And when I look at the growth sector map on 80, it's showing restricted growth for that same area.
Hold on. Sorry.
Yeah, you're fine. Those are the 3 maps I'm looking at. I'm just seeing what looks like different stuff. So we're saying in one area, there's limited service for this area, but then we're saying we want it traditional neighborhood, but then we're saying we want it restricted growth, which is where you don't add any new stuff there. Under specific circumstances you might, but not generally.
So in area 1,
Area 1, yes.
okay. So for red on number 1, okay, so the Nance Blanca River entitled land. And then what page did you say?
77. Future land use map.
Okay. So we have rural estate and traditional neighborhood in there.
Yeah.
So, and then what's the last page you said, 80?
80, yep. So 80 looks to me more consistent with the limited service areas where it's saying that's restricted growth, where we're saying expansion of infrastructure and development should be discouraged for the duration of the plan.
Sure. That is a specific area where the city has a development agreement and it was annexed because of the development agreement where we've agreed to provide so many LUEs. And I say LUEs, I mean living unit equivalents for water and wastewater service. Now that development, in the event that it does ever happen, they do need to do their part to extend services out there. So there will be times where we want to hold to this plan as much as possible, but there are circumstances where it'll look like we are stepping outside the bounds of that. But in the reality, we're just holding to a contract that we've already agreed to.
Gotcha, okay. I've got one other question in this section. The productivity of developed land use types on page 69. In the comments there, it says only some single-family homes are generating enough, which is why the bar is roughly half. But if I look at all the sections, it looks like the net per acre budget plus deferred liabilities is less than half for all of the types. So I guess I don't understand what this graph is trying to tell me, because it's not making a compelling case that multifamily is going to bring much more revenue to the table. Did I say that correctly? So the single family, if I take that gold bar and I folded my page in half and marked the line, the maroon bar is like the halfway point. But then if I fold the gold bar for multifamily and mark that line at the halfway point, it's still right at that same level. So it's not making the compelling case. To me, it's not. I don't understand this, so I don't know why other people who read this would be able to understand it.
So I'll say this, it is specific to the city of Kyle and how our development patterns have developed. But that is a question that Verdunity does need to clarify, because I'm wondering now the same question. Typically, multifamily does tend to do better from adding on a per acre basis from a value. But it also depends on the type of multifamily. So for example, vertical mixed use would probably fare a lot better from adding value on a per acre basis than just your straight garden style apartments, your 3-story walk-ups that are more dispersed across the land. So I wonder if that has an aspect of that to it. So that is a question that we need to ask Verdunity to clarify.
Good question, because there's a big difference in the acreage. 9,500 versus 306.
Any other questions or comments for, yes, sir?
Following up on that one, on limited service areas on page 67, it looks like they're kind of explaining it in the text above. That's incredibly hard to read. Can we get a breakout of that as well? That is a comment back to Verdunity.
You want it on a separate page with larger font, or what do you, I just want to make sure I understand.
So the way they have it put out is like, there's the dots, right? And then in the text above, there's like a .1, a significant area within the Nance Blanco River. the way that explains it is very hard to read, and I think I had a kind of a
Okay.
thought about that too, to Commissioner Onken's question as well, because I didn't fully understand that's exactly what they were explaining above. So I was wondering if we can kind of get it in like a tabular breakout or however
Or
they
bullet
deem
points
a little
or-
more. Yeah, just
Okay,
something where
okay.
it's more readable.
Just, okay, so formatting and what have you. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Any other questions for chapter 3? Actually, 3, part 1. We had to break it out into multiple pieces because Novus Agenda wouldn't let us load it. The file was too large, so. All right, and then we also talk about place types. So we also need further refinement on expectations from zoning and what have you. And part of that, we hope we can get addressed in this comp plan, but we are definitely going to have to address it in a code rewrite as well. Place types are, you're looking at more, what we would be okay with in different parts of the city and what have you, whether it be a larger lot, single-family residential, which is probably out towards the periphery of town, more in the ETJ, if you will, with more limited service, more acreage lots. Or if you're looking in downtown where you have, like I referenced earlier, a few over for the ground floor commercial with some multifamily above it, within reason, within context to the site. Larger areas that are more highly trafficked, like 1626 and I-35, those would be a much larger scale vertical mixed use, which we're already starting to see in these areas, maybe even along I-35 to some extent as well, depending on where water and wastewater services. And then also it breaks out between commercial and regional scale retail and also light industrial at the same time. Yes, ma'am.
All right, if we can go back to page 66. And I just want to make sure I'm understanding this right, because I think this is going to be probably one of the most important parts for me. Where does it make sense to grow? Are they telling us not to like tentacle out, but to like stay within what we've already started?
Yes,
Okay, so,
because we're not overcrowding. We don't want to do that. But we do want to focus our development efforts in the core of the city, the central part of the city, not just downtown, but along 35, along the major arterials where we already have really good water service, wastewater service. We have adequate roads for the most part, so we can focus there and go upwards, and so, or a little bit more dense, if you will. So that way, we don't have to keep extending sewer and water lines way out towards the edge. So we can, if we just need to upgrade them in one spot, we can do that, and what have you. So it'd be a more efficient network.
okay. I agree 100% with that. And I think there was a time that the city was just wanting to grab ETJ and annex in, and with that comes responsibility, right? Like we have to have utilities to them within, I think it's like 5 years. And so normally, as long as it's being developed, it's not a big deal. But I love the idea of taking what we have and just kind of enhancing that and making it better, as opposed to stretching out, our wings and trying to grab everything and bring them out, I guess, because we see it on the east side all the time. Not that I'm going to talk about east-west, but it's hard to have infrastructure to bring in this development. And so I can't imagine how much more difficult it would be if we started to go, even further out. So I just wanted to clarify that and make sure I understood it correctly. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So this eventually is going to lead to where, in due time, we're going to start seeing everything go up. It's
To a
designed,
point, yes.
it's being designed that way, correct?
So
It's being designed to where we're going to start, eventually, some of these developments are going to be starting to go the 3, 4, 5-story high developments.
if ultimately through the rezoning process, if that's something that as the Planning and Zoning Commission recommends and y'all as City Council approve on a per project basis, then yes. Now, there are caveats to that. We have to make sure there's adequate water and wastewater service to the site. We need to account for, in the future, we need to update our code to account for better traffic impact analysis requirements and what have you. So there's always things that projects can do to improve. And y'all as City Council, when we do our code rewrite, you have the final authority to say, okay, do we want apartments to go 5 stories, or do we want to keep them at 3, or do we want them to go 10, which
Yeah.
that may be That's a little out there. I'm not gonna argue that. So, depending on the project type or the zoning type, y'all ultimately get to decide. We'll bring recommendations to y'all when we're doing our code rewrite, but y'all will ultimately get to decide how you want it tweaked and adjusted for and what have you
Yeah,
as well.
I hear both sides where it's like, let's condense everything down versus building out. But it get to the point to where we're gonna have those approach us and say, your minimum height is 5 stories, correct? Is what we can build up for right now? Is within our code that they can only go to 5 stories?
Depending on the zoning district,
Depending on the
there's
zoning.
maximums.
Yeah.
So for example, retail services is 45 feet, so.
Okay.
I have a question. So if the recommendation will be to condense, kind of concentrate and build up, will the master plan have a recommendation on how to do it? Because chances are we will have to upsize infrastructure, water lines, and all of this.
And that's part of the things that we have to keep in mind on a area of the city or any specific area of the city, really, and even down to the per parcel level. So if someone ever does want to come in and they want to do vertical mixed use and they want to go 5, 6, 7 stories, what have you, we do have to make sure that they're coordinating with engineering and public works. We have to do that now. So if we're recommending an area to be developed in a more dense fashion, whether it be on a more local scale that's more in keeping with downtown or up at 1626, you always have to account for infrastructure. So it's not all going to be one mass block of, the city's not going to be a massive block of 5 or 6 story buildings. There's going to be nuance to it. So.
And I'm just thinking if we were to plan ahead of time, that we will require, the correct size of infrastructure now to plan for 10, 15 years ahead. Anyway, that was my comment.
I was going to make a comment to that. So we have 5 schools that are within our city limits. There's probably 3 new ones that are going to be built. Those are going to be outside our concentrated areas. They will bring in their own infrastructure, but we're basically going to follow them. Wherever those schools go, that's where we're going to extend as well. So although the comprehensive plan says, let's stay centered, I don't think these 3 new schools will be inside Kyle. So we're stretching. We're still having to stretch.
Maybe. It depends. There's multiple factors there. So the school district, one is its own jurisdiction, so they
Right.
decide where they're going to go ultimately. But depending on where they go, there's different service providers for water and wastewater, like Go Forth, Special Utility District, or County Line, or Monarch, if you will. And so when the school district is working to select sites, because right now they're updating their growth management plan. Those are things they have to consider. Who's the water provider and who's the wastewater provider, if there is. There are some schools, there's at least a couple schools that are probably on a commercial septic field, so offhand. So because there's no wastewater service out there. And that's stuff they have to do whenever they're looking to locate.
So the point is, I guess, we'll have to harmonize with them wherever they end up, and new subdivisions or grow around that, new businesses within our ETJ. Eventually, we probably have to build that infrastructure as well.
It depends on whose service area it is. We can't, for example, we can't service water in County Lines water, like Waterleaf, for example, or even some of Button Creek. We can't provide water out there, so we don't have the authority to do that. So if the school decides to go in a neighborhood like in 700 Button Lane where they're going, then yes, they have to coordinate with that water provider.
Okay.
Miguel?
Yeah.
Aren't you on the committee for the location of the new high school?
I was chosen.
So it's probably you'd be a good voice for the city of Kyle to be sharing some of these concerns.
Right, because we're talking about how the plan is work in our concentrated, efficiently infrastructure, but it's like we're still chasing the rabbit because the big elephant is the school district, like where they put their schools.
I will note that Rastegar has dedicated land to the schools. So in the event that we're growing in that way, the best way to kind of hope that we can bring the schools, because we have no control over that, to our areas is to request the developers to add that to, just dedicate the land, because that's going to be a lot easier for the school board to want to put a school there if they don't have to purchase that land. So moving forward, that might be something that the city probably would like to take into consideration.
Understood. No, it's a good suggestion generally, and I appreciate both of y'all's comments. From a school site situation, but we do also coordinate with the school district whenever they've asked us for, anytime there's a single family neighborhood with in excess of 100 homes, to bring them in on the conversation from the start, so that way they can start coordinating it with their plans and also start coordinating also with the developer. Now, if we're going to require that in a future code update as well, saying, hey, you got to provide so many acres for so many homes, we need to make sure that, one, we can legally do it, because Hayes CISD is a different government jurisdiction, and also, what is that number? So. So it's a good idea. Yes, sir.
Following up on a kind of some conversation I heard about a couple of questions ago, we were talking about the difference between planning for, core development versus planning for outward development. Just noticing there are some different things that the developing in the core kind of takes from the perspective of the planning department. What is the difference hours wise, or what is the difference that y'all expect as far as what's needed to process all of these things for things in our core, which need, different looks at sewer, water we were talking about, versus the things that when we grow outwards? Like, is there any sort of difference in that regard? Because I imagine a lot of those things are the same, right? They're still buildings, they still need sewer, they still need water, but I don't know if any of those things are we putting more pressure on the planning department in any sort of way? Is something I want to think about.
I don't have hours calculated per project for staff input. However, I will say this: generally, subdividing in the ETJ is a lot more simpler process, because generally we don't have water or wastewater service out there, or it's someone else's service area. Mm-hmm. So all we have to look at is it a rural subdivision greater than an acre versus not, for the most part. Maybe there's some aspects of it where we have some pocket parks depending on the size, scale of the project, but otherwise it's a lot more simple. Versus inside the city, we have to account for zoning, street infrastructure, water, wastewater. Then the developer has to also make sure they can get a will serve letter from the power provider if they're looking at any gas, and all the design that go into that project related to infrastructure, on top of parking, where the building's going to go, landscaping, and all that kind of stuff, where we have much more a cohesive authority. So it does get a lot more complicated inside the city, but that's the nature of the game too. So.
Is this component accounting for ETJ? Like,
It is from a growth scenario perspective. We all, in the process, whenever we are looking at development, we can't supersede state law either. So we are limited in what we can do in the ETJ. Now, there are caveats when maybe there's a project that has a development agreement where they agree to annex if they try to develop, and then we go from there. But for by and large, yes, the answer is yes. It does both the ETJ and city limits. Yes, sir.
So I went through the majority of this. Staff was wonderful enough to give me this large binder, and so I've had time to go through it. And while I was doing that, I was trying to put myself in the position of a resident who, when this is finalized, might want to see what we're up to. And it's just a ridiculous expectation for me in my position to think that any resident would sit and read through 150-some pages, 60-some pages. And I had been thinking about like an executive summary, something with bullet points, something really easily digestible. And then I looked at your presentation here, that's 20 slides. Is there a way that we could have a shorter version that we can have both available, but if we want to be realistic with giving people an opportunity to consume this
like a cheat sheet.
information? Yeah.
But we use
like-
the answer is yes,
Okay.
because I have a cheat sheet for the current comp plan that I use.
Yeah, like the Cliff's Notes
Right,
version
yes.
of.
And
of
I've read
this.
through the current comp plan several times that I
Yeah.
have. So yeah. The answer
Okay.
is yes. We can.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We can.
Comp
we can
plan for
have
dummies
that.
and dummy number one right here.
I think
So,
in that executive summary or cheat sheet or whatever you want to call it, I think it'd be really good to have like a core philosophies that the comp plan is trying to get at in detail, so that we, as a P&Z and a city council, can make sure that when we're adopting the comp plan, we're adopting these philosophies as well, because the comp plan points to the philosophies. So that would be good too, because there's a lot in here that, you know, my experience has been that comp plans, as soon as they're adopted, they're thrown out, in the sense that a zoning case comes forward, complies with the comp plan, fits right into all those things, and then, but for whatever reason, city councils and P&Zs just don't want to do it. So, you know, that's the challenge. But I think core philosophies at the beginning, we need to be on the record stating that, like, all right, we're supporting this concept, and these philosophies are going to dictate the future growth in the city, so that we can make sure that we're actually behind what's being proposed.
So Will, if you could just scrap this whole thing and redo it in about
Hold on
20
a second.
pages, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
No, I think that's a good idea. An executive summary on there that gets it down to its essence, and we can even potentially add it to backup material whenever we're reviewing something at a public meeting. That's good. Yes, sir.
Yes, regarding our discussion tonight, we've talked a lot and have been talking a lot about density. And in the community, that's been rattling around, it would seem to me, that there's a focus on apartments, and high density and not single-family homes. So that can be misleading, because that's not what we're talking about exactly. We're talking about diversity of housing.
Yes.
As well as density. So in terms of a cheat sheet or some summary, I would suggest that somehow we get to the core of the tension around that, because it does seem to be there even when we're talking about it.
Agreed.
Okay.
Maybe we could summarize what are like the 10 most common
Issues.
feedbacks that the city of Kyle gets, and how does this comprehensive plan address those common complaints?
Top 10 core values of the comprehension plan, like just list the top 10 and just all the way down. And then save this as the meat and potatoes in case somebody wants to just review it. But just like anything else, you could have the meat and potatoes, but all you want to look at is just the menu. You know, what's the pricing? That's all I need to know.
A little bit of light reading on the entire document.
I also have a suggestion for how to get kids involved reading the comp plan. I don't necessarily want to pay Verdunity to do this, but I think P&Z or staff or somebody, I think it would be good to have like a 1 or a 2-page insert that's a scavenger hunt. That we don't advertise, but it's in there, and if somebody finds it, they have to follow the clues, do various things, and then if they get to the end of the rainbow, they find themselves like at City Hall and they get like a medal or something like that. That's not advertised, but it's just in there, and let it kind of be like an organic thing. I've been thinking about that for 2 years since we were doing this. It's the first time I've said it on the record, but a scavenger hunt built into this thing towards the back end could be a way to encourage people to interact with it, you know, taking a book around.
Have the winner open the meeting.
No, I'm more along the lines of a little medal or something, you know, token.
The winner gets 2 days of water.
That would get people going right there.
Destination, Waterloo Falls.
Pass. Sprinkler pass.
All right. Are there any other questions for chapter 3? All right. Let's go to chapter 4, implementation. This one's a little bit more complicated. There's a bunch of tables on there for action items and what have you. But they mostly focus on and some major core items here. We're talking about areas focused on being open and transparent in our processes with development patterns in the city, how the items get approved. For principle of economic prosperity, making sure that not only is the city flourishing from this perspective, but that everybody has as equal opportunity as they possibly can to live and work here and play here. Fiscal responsibility for the city. Equity and justice generally. And then the implementation approach, which is both incremental, neighborhood-centric. We want high-quality projects, and we want stuff that adds to neighborhoods and lets people walk or bike and what have you. That's the goal. And so it comes over here with action types for guidelines, regulations, incentives, investments, education, community focus projects, and then also partnerships with nonprofits as well. Any other questions? Councilmember Parsley.
So when you talk about high quality products, how do we make sure that and I guess that will be probably a work for council to know that this fits the standards of our comprehensive plan in regards to quality of the things that we are bringing to the city? How do we set those standards? Are they outlined here?
So this sets the foundation. Ultimately, it has to happen through our regulatory framework for the code. So some of it's going to be, one of the recommendations on here is to define the gold standard, which has been a fun one to try to define. I'm not going to argue that. But we want to, so we need to figure out what that is exactly, and work how we can within legal restrictions from the state on how to accomplish that. We also need to account for, okay, it's not just facade treatments on buildings. You know, what's a quality development? Are we looking for a plaza in the middle? You know, if you're going to have multifamily, you got to have this public green space. Do you want it to be? What other items do we want to account for? We don't want to see a parking. Maybe it's parking in key areas, or
Yes.
it's concentrated like in a garage or something like that. You know, how does it interface with the trail system? How does it interface with the public park system?
So then will we need to have almost another comprehensive plan to define gold standard?
No. But we can work within our code, the follow-up code. And we need to use the documents also that we're going to be adopting ahead of that to provide direction on that. So, for example, the downtown master plan, part of that's going to have masonry and architectural design. At this point, it is a document to provide direction when it comes to this architectural design, because as a follow-up to the downtown master plan, we're going to see what we can do to implement within state law districts for the downtown master plan where we can actually enforce it or provide other means to be able to do that. So sometimes it's in the regulatory document that we're looking at here, but sometimes it's a little bit of both also in the code and in this.
And I don't know if it has to do with this. If we were to have the city divided kind of by districts, not like electoral districts, but are we able to set legally architecture standard if we were to have different districts within the city of Kyle, that we could set at least a minimum required standards for architecture or quality of life?
Sometimes. It depends on the situation, right? So, for example, we have the I-35 overlay, which is the most prominent district that we have, and that has standards in it. So that is vested prior to the 2018 House bill that passed. If we can also coordinate with the State Historic Commission and talking about our downtown area and make sure that we fit those regulatory requirements so we can implement a district here to be able to enforce a more beautiful downtown, a more historic feel. And so we can coordinate that, and that follows the downtown master plan, which is the foundation. Other areas, we have to be extremely careful about how we go about doing that because there's very few legal frameworks in place that the state hasn't overrode that we can account for. But occasionally, we can coordinate with the developer and they enter into a mutual agreement with us saying, okay, we're going to enforce these standards
Okay.
from that perspective, so.
Thank you.
With that said, I think that the council should seriously consider going to the Capitol and making some real requests, because there's a lot of things that I think the state has overstepped on a city's rights. And I think as a council, we oftentimes forget that if we, kind of bond together, not just with ourselves, but like with San Marcos and Buda, and we can just kind of figure out a way to advocate for ourselves. I know that Death Star bill was a huge ordeal, and I've been reading on it. And there are cities that are getting together to go and to kind of fight that. And so I think collectively, as a city, I think it would be a good idea if we found some of the things that we no longer agree with or we don't think is of the purview of the state, that we get together as council and go speak our voices over there as well.
Hold on, this is a workshop.
I will, there's 103 different action items there. And what's scary is 40 of them are P and Z involved there. So
You're welcome.
I'm a little intimidated, but
That's-
obviously it can't happen all at once, and maybe it all can't happen. So how are we going to go about setting priorities on what actions we take first? And
That would probably be a follow-up workshop meeting. We've had some internal discussions related to these action items as well, so we're probably going to be providing some comments to make them, these are good, but I think sometimes we need to distill it down to its essence as well and say, okay, what are some real ones that we can do, some realistic ones we can do in short order, medium-term goals, and long-term. Because some of these have a lot of public input, which we want to do and everything, but we also have resource restrictions for both staff time and what have you as well, so. So we want to make sure they're reasonable at the same time.
thanks.
Last time Verdunity was here, we talked a little bit about them adding some stuff about the accountability things, like how we could track and provide feedback back to constituents, and I don't see really anything under these recommendations that highlights that they've done any work on that. And I'd hope that we can get that before we pass a comp plan, so that we have some clear set of like what they think, kind of like we should look at when it comes to that, because that was a big conversation I think everybody at the table agreed with. But when I come back and I see that nothing has been done on that, it kind of is disappointing, because I definitely want to be able to communicate back effectively, to constituents in a way that is,
Can you, for the record, do you remember the specific date where we had that workshop where we talked about accountability?
Will, you're asking a person with ADHD to remember a date. I'm going to tell you, I don't
we can go back
exactly.
and look. I just want to make sure that
I'm
we're
so
looking
sorry.
at
It was the last one.
the last one.
That we had together.
Okay.
I do want to quickly point out Gen 1.g on page 122. Publish and distribute a biennial progress report on implementation items to the community. So maybe we want more around accountability, but they did try to make a nod to that.
Yeah, I think we need more. Just flat out is. I think it's important that if we're going to item out all of these things into task, we don't group something like that into a whole. Because it's easier for us to go, well then, what steps do we need to go, to achieve this? And then it becomes another task list. Yeah. And then I follow up, which is just that on the total right side of those recommendations, it says local partners can assist as. If I'm a local partner, I don't know that I'm going to dig 129 pages into this document. Is there any way we can get like maybe a breakout or like page for like if you're this stakeholder, here are ways you can assist? Because I think that would really help, not just for local business, but I'm thinking about, you know, the one that says supporters or promoters or volunteers. You know, how are we making sure they're getting this super efficiently and clearly?
Are you talking about like overall for the comp plan?
Just in the recommendation section. But if there is a way to incorporate the whole plot plan, I don't see why not. I think that the more people we have, you know, seeing this and getting
And understanding
on board,
it, right? Yeah.
yeah, and getting on board, the less likely it will be that we pass something that we throw away for the next shiny object.
No, I agree.
So-
I agree. Is there anything that we can do to kind of, I don't want to say, how do we say it nicely? Just to like PowerPoint it and so people understand like what the major discussion points are throughout?
So,
Yeah, cheat sheet. I was gonna call it dummies for me. Oh, I wasn't here.
so I think it depends on the specific item, the action item. So then if we have something coming forward, we can account for, as best as possible, for public outreach to specific subgroups and what have you, like.
Maybe some highlights.
Yeah,
of the
like,
section?
for example, where we collaborate with neighboring jurisdictions and regional agencies on policies and projects for regional trails, thoroughfares and transit, water supply and all that. That's a situation, especially for like water, we've entered into the Alliance Regional Water Authority, so we have multiple people that are on that board from different jurisdictions to get that project happening. Also, regional trails, working with, I think it's, for the Emerald Crown Trail and the organizations with that, making sure that our trail systems match that and what have you, coordinating with them whenever something, occasionally stuff pops up, we're like, oh, we should probably reach out to these people, this group, and just make sure that we're on the same page for connecting the trail system and where their point ends and ours starts and stuff like that. So a lot of it comes down to the specific items, the specific project at hand. So, as an example.
But I do think there are general ones, like I'm looking at NH 1.B, where it's offer incentives to support entrepreneurs and setting up neighborhood grocery stores, cafes, clinics. One of those things is economic development being on there, but also supporters. So I'm thinking of the folks over in the Chamber of Commerce, you know, before we get to where we're talking about a grocery store, we can prime them of being able to say, you know, these are the things that we're, like, this is something that's on our key thing to look for. You know, y'all are people in the business community. You hear a lot from businesses, some of them who want to come in, some of them who don't. This is something that we're looking at so that it can be on your radar and be talking about it. So we can achieve that successful and more fast, I think faster.
Absolutely. And we also have, per that example, we have our economic development department also working in situations like that, and they collaborate between the city and Chamber of Commerce as well. And they even have contacts even outside the city for developers or key developers that they're like, oh, we should probably try to reach out to them, see if they're interested in that kind of stuff. Yes, sir.
Towards that end, I would agree with Commissioner James that it's good for the local community, the business community, or other stakeholders to be very well informed about how this is rolling forward. This isn't just something we're, again, throwing out there, but, you know, just different than a general summary or cheat sheet, but really actively engaging some of these people, because the report, it gets buried in here, says one of the best ways to sustain a community in the end is to develop local business. So the money stays in the community, and the people who own the businesses have a stake in the community at large because they live here and have a business here. And so it would be good to somehow interface with Chamber or whomever to really emphasize that we want to incentivize or create opportunities for business, for instance, in downtown, and really make sure that there's good messages to those folks. Because what we see is we attract a lot of development, but not a lot of local money. And you don't see Frost Bank promoting projects here with local owners, for instance. And that's probably something we would want to see, so.
All right, any other questions? All right, so the last chapter is the appendices. It mostly focuses on considerations for recommended code updates, and it also has a huge chunk of where they collected their data, Verdunity, the resources related behind it, all the public outreach we did, everybody who provided on the surveys, and the sticky notes we put on the boards, and all that kind of stuff for the multiple times that we went out and had our public outreach. Does anybody have any questions about this? Okay. I'll reiterate this. If you have any other questions or want to make any comments following tonight, we have until the 1st to get it done. So feel free to email us, give us a bullet point, say, I want this comment. I noticed on this page here that there is this situation that I want clarification, or I think it needs an edit. Let us know. There's also on the one of the first pages it may be the first page on the comp plan, there's a link to the same spreadsheet. Anybody here can look at it and plug into it. So please feel free to reach out to us, plug in your comments, concerns, and we'll be doing the same thing on our side based on tonight's meeting. Yes, sir.
Hey, well, also on the, just follow up on the executive summary, kind of follow up, is that going to be, English and Spanish? Is that something that we can have?
It's a good idea.
Yeah. So,
We can work to accomplish that, although we'll probably need some, making sure we're editing it appropriately for the Spanish language, of course.
If y'all get it fully edited to how you want it in English, I can submit it for some like Spanish translation after it's fully done. Do it that way.
Okay.
This way.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Well, that wraps up this segment of it. And at this point, I believe the next item on the agenda is adjournment.
All right, motion to adjourn.
Second.
Council's adjourned. P&Z, you got to stay, so.
But first, we have to adjourn from this meeting too, so motion to adjourn. Okay, lovely, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
All right.